if we just said, if you've got more than $50 million in assets, and we put in place a 2-cent tax on your wealth, and by the way, people pay taxes, pay property taxes all the time on unrealized gains. You pay your property taxes on your home. But a 2-cent wealth tax, think what that would mean in this country right now. It would mean that we could provide universal child care for every one of our babies. We could put much more money into our public school system. We could provide free post-high school technical school, 2-year college, 4-year college. We could cancel all student loan debt, and we could still have a lot of money left over.
It's really easy to be Santa Claus with other people's money. Is it not? Very easy. You know, in the spirit of giving, I'm going to demonstrate my generosity by giving you someone else's hard-earned money. Look how generous I am. That is the whole basis of the left's economic belief set and their fiscal policy. Welcome back to the program. Dana Loesch here with you. Bottom of this third hour. I immediately thought of when I saw this interview, I was like, what would Grover Norquist say about this? Because I know that Elizabeth Warren's probably one of his favorite people, one of his favorite mathematical minds out there. As you know, Grover Norquist is president of Americans for Tax Reform, ATR.org. He joins us now. Grover, very good to see you. I just wanted to get your initial reaction to that soundbite from Elizabeth Warren.
This is the woman who is the poster child for student debt. She made $400,000 a year teaching a course once a year. There are 1,000 people in Boston who know more than she does on the subject, who'd have done it for free to work at Harvard. But she's taking $400,000 away from students and saddling them with student debt, which she evidently is willing to pay for with other people's money. So maybe that evens it out.
Yeah, maybe so. I mean, she's also one of the people directly responsible for the increasing cost of college. I mean, when the government moved to consolidate everything at the federal level and handle administration of student loans, I mean, what did people think was going to happen? She was one of the people there for it.
She created the problem. She was part of the problem. It's very sad. But she has a new idea. If you're worried about your income taxes and the business taxes and sales taxes and property taxes, she's got an additional tapeworm to add to your problems that will, make all the other tapeworms be more restrained, or maybe not.
I love that you used tapeworm to describe that. I don't know if I've ever heard a more perfect description, and I'm going to steal it. I'm going to completely shamelessly steal it because it's perfect. All right, I wanted to ask you about this because there's a case right now before Supreme Court. We've mentioned it a little bit on the show, but we were really waiting for you because you know so much about this. This concerns this move from this couple, Charles and Kathleen Moore. They had invested almost $500,000 in this business in India named Kaizen Craft. They marketed power tools to Indian farmers. They got 13% of the company's equity. It was a pretty decent investment. But what ended up happening is that they were hit with this, it's like almost $15,000 tax bill, and on money that they had not yet possessed, or what they would call unrealized gains. And I mean, it seems like a pretty open and shut case. They're citing Article 1, Section 9, Clause 4, where they're talking about no other direct tax shall be laid. That seems pretty clear. So why are we all the way now at the Supreme Court with this case?
Because the left is desperate for new sources of revenue. You're quite correct that when the 13 states got together and created the federal government, the biggest concern they had was that the central government would tax their people and cause the same problems that we had with Britain. Okay, we had a whole war because we didn't want the British government taxing a certain switch. So they were very specific. Now, they weren't very slapdash in the rest of the Constitution, but they were extremely specific. Congress can have these kinds of taxes when the big spenders of their day wanted more money and they wanted a personal income tax. They had to amend the Constitution because the Supreme Court twice struck down efforts to get a income tax during the Civil War and then even afterwards. They said, that's not in the Constitution, can't do it, can't tax income. And so they said, okay, we have an income tax. Now they want to say income that's not realized, income that isn't income will now be income, meaning your life savings, the increase in your life savings. What Elizabeth Warren and others have said, they really want a wealth tax, which is clearly unconstitutional. But this is the midway to get to a wealth tax. It's the increase in your wealth tax, which is not permitted if you sold your stock you would pay capital gains tax on it. That would be income because you would have it. The couple that went to the Supreme Court, we filed an amicus brief at Americans for Tax Reform, friends of the couple, not friends of the government. An amicus brief. Going, we're with them, not you. They said, and we said, they don't have the money. It's not income. And by the way, if the stock went down next week, they could lose money. Okay. Is the government going to be writing checks to people who lose money? Every time the stock market goes down, does Bezos get a $3 billion check? And when it goes back up again, he's got to send it back, and you ping it back and forth. It makes sense to tax. You tax income. You tax income when it's income.
Yeah. And that seems like that's ultimately the core question that has to be resolved in this case. I know that there was, I had read a linguistics professor that also filed an amicus brief, and they were going back to the whole etymology of the word, saying that, at the time, when all of this was drafted, everybody pretty much realized that this was money that you had to have made and had to be real in order for it to be taxable, which it just makes it seem like the government's case on this is incredibly weak. How do you think that this will be resolved?
I don't see how this Supreme Court, which has several members in it that have read the Constitution all the way through, can miss the fact that non-realized income, property is not income. Right. Your house is not income. Right. A stock is not income until you sell it. Then it could become income. If you made money, it could also be a loss if the price had gone down, which is why you wait until they sell it to decide what it is. At least that's what normal people do. I think they have to say not realized income is not income. It is wealth, it is property, and it's not taxable. Now, they could then end with that, and then other courts would deal with, are there other examples of this? In the 2017 bill, there was a measure which deemed that certain property had in overseas had been brought back to the United States and then would be recognized as income, but it hadn't come back to the United States. Right. So they were going to tax it. That's where they got into this mess, because they were trying to make some things balance, and they weren't paying attention, and they were under a lot of pressure, and they shouldn't have done what they did. They should just strike that down. Whatever revenue was raised from that needs to stop. And if you want to have a wealth tax, pass a constitutional amendment. If you want to have an unrealized gain tax, pass a constitutional amendment. But Biden and the other Democrats have been talking for some time. They want to figure out how to tax your 401k, your individual retirement account, your health savings account, your education savings account. They've been trying to get in there to tax it for some time. And taxing unrealized gains cracks open those life savings projects that are so important to more than half of Americans.
Right.
This is not free rich people. This is more than half of Americans.
That's exactly where I was going with this next, because that's how this is presented. We're talking with Grover Norquist, Americans for Tax Reform, ATR.org. That's how this is always presented to people, as a way to sort of, the Elizabeth Warrens, the Joe Bidens, the Kamala Harrises. They're like, oh, well, this is all in favor of rich people. But it's not, as you just described.
Well, this is trickle-down taxation. Politicians like to say we're going to tax rich people with the income tax. You have to make more, at the time, more than $11 million when the income tax was put in, to pay the top rate of 7%. Now more than half the country pays more than 7%. Trickle-down taxation. When they put in the tax for the Spanish-American War, more than 100 years ago, they had a tax on phones, on long-distance phone calls. And phones cost like $9,000 at the time in their dollars. Very expensive. Very few people had them. But within a few decades, all Americans had a phone. So the tax on the rich for an emergency, the war, that was going to be temporary. War was over at some point. I went to public school, but somebody told me that the war ended a while ago. And so it's an emergency, it's temporary, and it's just the rich people, except pretty soon it's all the time, everywhere, everyone. Trickle down. They always introduce taxes, telling you it's someone else, a few people, not anyone you know. Step out of the room. It may not be pleasant, but it's not you. When they say they're going to tax the rich, they haven't finished the sentence. We're going to tax the rich first, then you.
And that's how it always works. Talking with Grover Norquist. This also would empower. This is why they probably were preparing for this, what they assumed was an eventuality with this case. You have the 88,000 new IRS agents, because if you're out there unable to tax all these unrealized gains, goodness, you got a lot of busy agents, a lot of work for them.
Going after, unpacking, going through and surfing through everybody's 401k or individual retirement account. And now all of the 1099Ks that they want, because you send money through the internet on PayPal or any of the other Venmo and so on. They want to tax all of those, sell something out of your basement, taxable, unless you have the receipt, the whole thing's income. They need a lot of IRS agents going through your basement, looking at everybody's flea market, at everybody's, when you sell stuff from your back of your house or out on the street, or on Venmo or Craigslist or any of these things. They want to tax it all. And if you don't have the receipt, you sell a motorbike perhaps for a lot less than you paid for it.
Yeah.
But if you don't have the receipt, it's all income. Prove it isn't.
Oh, that's, oh goodness. I'm glad that you're confident that this case is going to be resolved in favor of the taxpayer as opposed to in favor of the government. But I mean, who knows? Because there's a lot of other stuff that's already been passed. Like you mentioned, Venmo, looking at, what is it? I think the minimum $600. I mean, that's still, it's not in effect yet, but it's been delayed as I understand it, but it's still there. It's still going to be implemented.
It's in the law. The law has not changed. Illegally, the president has said, we're not going to enforce it, meaning please don't yell at us during this election cycle, okay? We'll enforce it after I get reelected. This is the second time they've delayed it. It's not legal. The law says it's all owed. They've taken it down to $600, and it's going to hit many, many tens of millions of Americans. They realized the pushback, and the Republicans said, let's repeal it. And when that was moving forward, then the IRS, which is completely political under this administration, responding to Biden saying, our political needs are for you to lie to people and say we're not going to enforce it. And we're not going to enforce it yet. Yes. And of course, we'll come back as soon as they get past the next election.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot more to talk about then. Heaven help us all. Grover Norquist with Americans for Tax Reform. Always a pleasure. So appreciate what you do. Thank you.